Hello and welcome to New England Authors. We record here in Cambridge, Massachusetts and broadcast around the region of New England. And it's so good to have you. We have a wonderful guest today. We're going to talk about music, and we have a professor of music from Harvard, Thomas Forrest Kelly, who has written many books about opera, about classical music, and this latest book, which is one of the most beautiful books I've ever seen, about musical notation and the history of musical notation. And so good to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kameel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so the book is called Capturing Music. And so I want to start by asking you, do you consider musical notation, the stuff the musicians read on a sheet, do you consider that a language?
A language, well, people say music is a language in the sense that music communicates something. It's like language, but there are lots of differences. Language says something specific, and music says a different thing to every person. So in some ways, yes, and in other ways, no. But the basic idea here was not to do something technical about music, but it's about, at the same time, it's about technology as far as I'm concerned,
right,
and about the amazing moment when somebody decided, way back in the early Middle Ages, that it was so hard to remember all these songs she had to sing in church that maybe she made a little mark on a piece of parchment and hid it under her habit and used it tomorrow to remind her of a piece that she sang today. We call it musical notation. I call it maybe the world's first recording device, because it is a piece of technology that allows something that you can't see, that won't hold still, that isn't there, that exists only in the knife edge of the present moment, allows that to be somehow, that's why we use the word captured, transported and made visible in space and time. It's an amazing idea. It seems obvious to us because we're so used to it. But there was a time when there was no musical notation at all, and people all said music only exists in the moment that it happens, or in the memory, or otherwise it's completely gone. It all started, this idea, it was an idea of my wife's. She said, why do you write books for general audiences like this First Nights book here, this First Nights at the Opera book? Why do you write books for general audiences about things that you don't know about? Or what she really meant was the things that you don't study as a scholar. And I thought, well, the reason I do is because I thought the stuff that I studied might be boring.
So I want to ask you a question, Thomas Kelly. Now, I'm going to go back a little bit. We have two scales in Western music. One is called diatonic, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. It consists of 7 notes, right? The other is...
Who's the expert here, yeah.
The other is chromatic, and you divide an octave into 12, right? In 12 pieces.
Yep.
How did that come about?
Well, it's not so much to do with notation, but the fact is, almost everybody probably has seen a piano keyboard.
Right.
If you have, you can remember that there's a row of white keys that are close to the player, and then some black keys, not quite as many black keys, and a second row back. And the white keys are all the notes that they used in the Middle Ages. And the guy who decided, let's draw some lines and some space, let's draw some lines and put these signs that we've been using on those lines and spaces, he made a line and a space for all the notes he needed. And the notes he needed were the notes that everybody else in the church, which is where he was, and he was talking about the Gregorian chant that they sing every day, he needed a notation for that kind of stuff. So we have lines and spaces for those notes, but those are only the white notes. They call this ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la. We changed ut to do, so do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, just as you say.
Yeah.
And gradually people started to say, well, you know, you could, if you wanted to, you could go do, da, da, that you could make a note in between do and re and call it do sharp or C sharp or whatever. And that's where the black keys gradually came in. First, there was only one. There was B flat, or actually, they didn't think of it that way. They said, there's one ut, one re, one mi, but there are two kinds of B. There's the sharp, there's what they call the square B, or the hard B, and the soft B. the hard B was written with the letter B with really angular, and it became our sharp sign. And the soft B was written with the smooth little b, and that became our flat sign. But those are really both the letter B. Anyway, so the white notes in the front are the medieval notes, and the black notes in the back are the ones that don't belong to the notational system. And they still don't belong to the notational system. If you write a series of notes on a staff, you're writing the white notes. And if you want any of the black notes, you got to put a mark in front of it. So that the piano keyboard that we have and the way that we write music betray or reveal their origins in very early medieval music.
But before that, you start off with cuneiform tablets that were used in Mesopotamia, what's now Iraq. How many, 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, something like that, you know. And there was some tablets that had music in it?
Well, we're pretty sure it's music and not a laundry list or a thing that says "buy bologna" on the way home from work. But we think it is. We also know of a notational system that the ancient Greeks used.
Right.
They actually had two kinds. They had one for instrumental music and one for vocal music. And there are other kinds of musical notation that you can imagine. Anybody can imagine a number of varieties of ways of writing music down, just to show that some other cultures have come up with ways of writing down some aspects of music. You know, you can never write down every aspect. When you think about it, what we use, people who know music notation will know that it really only tells you two things. It tells you what note it is and how long that note lasts.
Right.
It's a half note or a whole note, and it's a B or an A or a C sharp. And that everything else in our notational system has to be written around the edges, like what instrument should play this, how loud should it be played, is it played staccato, do you speed up, do you go fast, do you go slow? None of that stuff is part of the core of the system. The system only says what note is it and how long does it last.
Right.
And so it's not perfect. And other systems, you can imagine, might attach more importance to other aspects of it. They might have right at the center of their system an indication of how loud the thing is.
So I've sung in choirs in a monastery, and you get the Gregorian type of chant, which everybody's familiar with, and it's very easy to read. There's a square box on a 5 row scale, and then there's a little line that goes up. So you're saying ah, and a
it
little
connects to another square box.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's very easy to read.
It's very easy to read.
What's wrong with that?
Nothing's wrong with that. The thing about the notation that actually that square notation you referenced started at the end of the 12th and the early 13th century, when people they used to have signs called neumes that were delicate little traceries, sort of signs that went up and were a group of two notes going up or down, up, down, things like that. But when scribes, people who knew how to write, decided they would now write with this new, very cool, a very new Gothic kind of script, like the headline of the title of the New York Times. When you want to write in Gothic script, you have to get a pen. Do you remember those italic pens that write a very broad stroke in one direction, but a very narrow stroke in another direction? Right. Well, that's the pen you need to write Gothic script. And if you try to write the older neumes with that pen, what you end up with, whether you like it or not, is little squares. To make a little square with that pen, all you got to do is go, ooh, and you got a square. Then you go up like this, and you have a hairline, and then you go, ooh, and you got another square.
Yeah.
So the origin of that square notation is just the change of pen in the 13th century.
Interesting.
Another thing about that notation is it's wonderful to use, but it only tells you one thing. It tells you what the note is, but that notation doesn't tell you how long the note is.
That's right.
So
yes.
you and the rest of the people in your monastery have got to come to some accommodation about that.
Yeah. Well, then we come to, you talked about one guy said, and that guy was?
His name was Guido. Guido
yes.
the monk.
Yes.
We call him Guido of Arezzo. In Arezzo, actually, and in the book there's a nice picture of it. In the town of Arezzo, there's a big statue of Guido. In Arezzo, they call him Guido the monk, Guido Monaco. everywhere else he's called Guido of Arezzo, though he wasn't from Arezzo and he didn't spend all that much time there. That's another story. Anyway, Guido did a couple of amazing things. He was the guy who said, it takes years and years and years and years to learn to be a singer in this line of work. In church, even though you sing the same songs over and over and over again, it takes forever to learn them. It's just a waste of time. And he has a little introduction to his very cool music book that says, people who learn to lead a donkey, if you can lead one donkey, you can lead any donkey. Once you learn how to prune a fig tree, you can prune any number of fig trees. But the poor singer, once you've learned one song, you only know one song, it doesn't help you with anything else. I have a system that's going to allow people to be able to sing from musical notation a piece they have never sung before. Because you have to consider that up until his time, musical notation existed. It was very useful, but it was to help you remember a song you already knew.
Right.
It was. They didn't have the concept of what we call sight reading, where you see something that you don't. Well, he said, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do just what you referenced earlier. I'm going to draw some lines where we put all these neumes, and I'm going to say, whenever this sound comes, I want it to be on this line. So you got to arrange it so that the various notes are always on their correct line or the space between those lines. And once you do that, and you say, this is ut and this is re, and then you have it. Then you have one piece of the grid. You have the what note is it, and you have that specifically. So once you teach people the system, which is a fairly simple system, then, and he was able to demonstrate, then you can sing a song you've never seen before. And he took it to the Pope in Rome, and the Pope said, I'm not leaving this room until you teach me how to sing a song at sight. And he did, and the Pope did, and it caught on immediately everywhere for obvious reasons, because it saves you a huge amount of time learning your music.
Tom, I just want to add that for people who don't read music, it's really easy to learn, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You could learn it.
You could learn it.
You could learn music very fast, and it's such a helpful thing. When did Guido live?
He lived at the end of the 11th century.
Yeah.
So
and was he responsible for what we call do re mi?
Yes.
He created a poem, right?
He didn't create a poem. He said, remember that hymn that we sing in honor of St. John the Baptist? Well, here's this melody for this hymn, and note the following thing about this melody. Each line begins one note higher, and the melody goes like this. I'm going to sing the first notes of each line really loud and long, so you'll see what the trick is. Utque ant laxis resonare fibris mira gestorum famuli tuorum solve pollutis labireatum sancte Johannes. So he said, did you notice? It goes, ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la. He just said, let's just use those syllables, those opening syllables of that poem for each of those successively higher notes, so that when we refer to a note, we can say fa, and everybody will know what we mean because it's the one on that line there of my new staff. So Guido is the guy who's responsible for the names of the notes, for the shape of the piano keyboard, and for the fact that we can read music at sight. That's a pretty large contribution, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Now, in Europe, we say a piece of music is in the key of C.
Mm-hmm.
In Europe, they say it's in the key of Do.
Yeah, or they might say
ut.
The French still say ut. Ut majeur. Ut, they still use Guido's word ut, which was the first syllable of that poem. But the Italians changed it to do. I don't know why. So it's probably so that we could have the sound of music.
And in America we changed it to letters.
Well, no, Guido used those letters too. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. He used those, and he used ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la.
Why did he start at C?
Well, he didn't start at C. He started at a low A. But he said, and not only that, but there's a note below that bottom ut. and there's a bottom note that's called a gamma ut, a note, the lowest note, gamma ut, and that's where we get our word gamut. We run the whole gamut from one end to another. It's from Guido's word gamma ut, used a Greek letter for the very lowest note of his system.
All right, this is New England Authors. We're having a great discussion about this book, Capturing Music, with Professor Thomas Kelly. Tom, this was a really beautiful book. It's got a CD in it.
I'm happy about the book. It's published by W.W. Norton, and they were very kind to make a book that has beautiful facsimiles of manuscripts so that you can see what this musical notation I'm talking about and that Guido is talking about, what it looks like in some of the most beautiful books in the world. It's not a book designed to teach you how to read music. It is designed to show how people gradually figured out improvements in the information that's included in here. And it has some beautiful pages in it. And in the back of the book is a CD by a wonderful Boston group called Blue Heron, who collaborated with me on this, so that you can listen to these 2 pages here. You can listen to the gorgeous manuscripts that are in the book. So what I wanted it to be is what it turned out to be, a book that sings to you.
Yes, yes. Well, I think it is so beautiful, and it's really great to feel. And when you were talking earlier, you were kind of reminding me, they only had words, right, initially, before Guido. And it kind of reminded me of karaoke. We knew the song, we just need to have the words flashed on the screen.
Absolutely right. And the earliest music books we have are, I guess you would call them music books, are books that don't have any what we would call musical notation. They only have the words of the song. But you know, when my children were little, we used to sit at the dinner table after dinner and sing songs. And we had a tiny little book about 2 inches high that was called, I don't know what, America's Best Loved Songs or something like that.
Yes.
And it had the words to On Top of Old Smoky and Turkey in the Straw and stuff like that. And that was all we needed. We knew the tunes, but who can remember the second verse of Turkey in the Straw? So it was a music book. It was a book that had songs in it, and it was very, very useful for its purpose because we knew the tunes. So these earlier books that have just the words but not the music, we think, well, that's kind of primitive, that's not useful. Nobody makes a book that's not going to be useful. So if that's what they're used to, if that's what they need, I know the music, but as you say, I'm not sure I can remember the words. This book is exactly what you need.
Yes, yes. Even like Christmas carols, singing Christmas
Absolutely,
carols,
sure.
you get the
Do you
word.
really need the music for Jingle Bell? You really need the music for Silent Night? And not really.
Okay, so the story of Western music, though, is a story of Christianity, isn't it? It was church music.
The origins of the notation and of the writing of music, yes, inevitably. Because if you think about it, the only people who knew how to write were church people. That's why the word cleric and clerk are the same word. These are people who know how to write. Yeah. Of course there were instrumentalists. Of course there were fiddlers. Of course there were people playing music at weddings, people playing music for dancing. Of course mothers sang lullabies to their children. Of course people sang love songs. The only thing is they didn't write them down. So we have no idea what that vast amount of music was like. The only music we can study until we get to the lyric poets of the 12th and 13th century is church music, because that's all that was written, and written documents are essentially all we have.
Let me ask you this. By the way, I heard just about a week ago the number of pianos in homes in this generation has diminished quite a bit. People rely mostly on their CD, listening to a CD rather than playing to the piano.
I don't even listen to CDs anymore. It used to be the piano, and then it became the radio, and then it's the CD, and now it's, I don't know, whatever streaming service people use.
Yes, so I have discs, vinyl discs, and I find the sound so much.
Well, I have to say, you know, guys our age have things like that, but I think there are a lot of people who don't.
So when I learned to play the bagpipe, I learned classical Scottish bagpipe music.
You probably
the
changed
old,
apartments a
the
lot,
class,
didn't you? Yeah.
you don't play it in, you don't play it in your
No, you
apartment.
don't
You
play it
play it
inside.
outdoor.
Yeah.
Anyway, when I was learning this, I went to Scotland, and
Wow.
what was emphasized with me to learn the classical music. You know, most people associate bagpipes with marches and stuff like that,
Yes.
but there was a classical, which is very slow and lamenting and so on. And what was stressed is that you're not supposed, you need the notation, but you have to have the music handed down to you from a
No doubt.
master.
Bagpipes
that-
are full of little ornaments and little twiddles and little things
Yes.
like that probably are not in the notation, right? You just have
Oh
to,
no, they are in the,
They are,
well, they're little squiggles, and you know what they are.
all of those matters of expression and feeling and sort of slowing down at the beautiful note, or emphasizing the beautiful note and making it a little bit long, or how much vibrato you use on your violin, or how to make a crescendo while you're playing this beautiful piano phrase. Some of that is sometimes in the music, but most of it is not. It's not, and that's, in a way, that's good. And that's also why every performance is different, because what the performer chooses to add is something that's not there. You probably don't go messing around with the notes very much, but because all you have is the notes, you have a lot of latitude to do different things. And so the notes, and for a lot of music, is a kind of framework for a performance. And the performance is where the music is. I mean, the notes are the cookbook, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't eat a cookbook.
Yeah.
You got to make the cake first.
Okay, this is New England Authors. We're talking with a great professor, Tom here, Tom Kelly. Thanks so much for being with us. I want you to talk, I want to change the subject slightly, and I want to talk a little about classical music and opera. Where does it stand today? Is it on the decline? Now, I have to say, I go to the Boston Symphony Orchestra for many years. I see the audience declining. Although the statistics don't bear me out, or the BSO statistics don't bear me out on this. What do you see? What's your experience with students and so on?
Well, gosh, it is true that the Boston Symphony Orchestra and the Metropolitan Opera and many other institutions in America and elsewhere are institutions that got their start in the 19th century, when the only way to listen to, or earlier than the 19th century in some cases, when the only way to listen to music was either to know how to make it yourself or to be physically present in real time at the place where music was being made. And so the privilege of hearing an orchestra must have been just amazing. I mean, one didn't hear an orchestra just by putting on a CD or turning on the radio.
Yeah.
That was a big, and an opera, my word. So they were magical things that were, and especially the opera, at the center of high-tech creativity and performance. Everybody wanted to go, and in Italy, opera is really the literature, the whole art form of the whole country up through the whole 19th century. Now we have a lot of competition for that. We can hear these things not live. We can hear a huge opera anytime we want to. And we have other kinds of high-tech entertainment, sports events with their amazing halftime shows. There are lots of other, lots of things competing for our public real-time entertainment. You know, because it's hard. You got to get your clothes on. You got to go downtown. You got to find a place to park your car. You got to go in there with all those people and find a seat in there just to hear this orchestra play. Hell, I have the same piece at home on my CD. Well, I mean, when you go, you instantly understand why you went and why it's different from staying at home. It's a whole other world, and it's so exciting to have those 180 people up there playing music for me. I think, but it's not. It doesn't have the central place in our culture that it once had, and so. Who knows? It's going to be hard for every orchestra that's out there now to survive at the level it's at now. I think I hope that's not true, but I think it may be. I don't think the Boston Symphony Orchestra is going anywhere. I don't think the Metropolitan Opera is going anywhere. But I think a lot of other regional opera companies, maybe a lot of smaller, less well-endowed symphonies. I don't know, but as regards students, we get at Harvard every year a lot of students who, for some reason or another, play the violin, play the piano, play the cello. They want to play in an orchestra. We have a big, very large student orchestra, the Harvard Radcliffe Orchestra.
Sure.
They're great. If you live around here, go to their concerts. They're terrific. So there are young people who care about this music, and they come in considerable numbers. I don't know how considerable those numbers are. It is true that when you go to the symphony, there's a whole lot of gray and white-headed people like me who are in there. But the thing is, everybody who's young now, with any luck, will get to be old and be gray-headed and white-haired like me, and you might find yourself going to the symphony when you get to be. It's fine, because all those people, yes, they'll all go to the great symphony in the sky, but there are a lot of people waiting for their seats as soon as they can afford them and have the cultural background. That's my hope, is that they're all going to be replaced with other people.
That's
remains to be seen.
Well, that's really great, and a great place to end off. Thank you so much for being with us today. We had the great privilege of having the author of Capturing Music, Thomas Kelly, professor at Harvard. Thank you so much. Remember, watch locally.
Thank you, Kameel. It's a pleasure to be here.